Hi guys, today we are going to read The Little Mermaid. Deep in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, lies the kingdom of the Sea King. The Sea King had 6 daughters. The youngest of these sea princesses was the prettiest, with skin as delicate as a rose leaf and eyes as blue as the sea. The Sea King's castle was made of coral and of shells that opened and closed as the water flowed over them. In each shell was a glittering pearl. Around the castle was a beautiful garden with bright red and dark blue flowers, and waving leaves and stems. The Sea King's wife had died, so the princess's old, wise grandmother looked after them. They were very happy playing all day long in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers of the sea. Fish swam up and ate from their hands and let the princesses stroke them. Each princess had their own little garden. The youngest grew flowers as red as the sunset in hers. She also had a beautiful marble statue of a handsome boy. It had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a shipwreck, and the princesses liked it very much. She planted a red weeping willow tree by the statue, and it grew quickly until its fiery branches hung down almost to the sand. Most of all, the little mermaid loved hearing about the world above the sea. She asked her grandmother to tell her everything she knew about ships and towns, people and animals. Many nights the little sea princess sat by her open window, looking up through the dark blue water. She could see the moon and stars shining faintly. "When you are 15, said her grandmother, you'll be allowed to swim to the surface and sit on the rocks in the moonlight. The little mermaid's oldest sister turned 15 and swam up to the surface of the ocean. When she came back, she talked about hundreds of things. "The most beautiful feeling," she whispered, "is lying on a sandbank in the moonlight, in the quiet sea, watching the lights of a nearby town twinkling like stars." A year later, her second sister was allowed to swim up. "The most beautiful thing," she whispered, "is the sunset." The third sister followed. She was the boldest and swam up to a river to watch a group of children without fishtails playing in the water. The fourth sister was more timid and remained in the sea, but said the sky above was beautiful, like a bell of glass. The fifth sister had a winter birthday. When she swam up, she found icebergs glittering like green diamonds. Finally, the little mermaid was 15. Her grandmother gave her a garland of lilies for her hair, and she rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the ocean. A large ship with 3 masts lay nearby, not moving. The little mermaid could hear music and singing, and hundreds of colored lanterns were lit on deck. Suddenly, fireworks exploded in the air, flashing and banging. The little mermaid had never seen such a thing before. It looked as if the stars of heaven were falling around her. She swam closer and looked in through a low window at well-dressed people inside. She saw a young prince with large black eyes, the most beautiful person of all. It was his 16th birthday party. He smiled at his guests, and the little princess couldn't take her eyes off of him. After a while, the sky grew dark and heavy clouds rolled in. A terrible storm came. Waves rose up as high as mountains, and before long the ship gave way under the power of the sea. The main mast snapped like a twig, the ship rolled onto its side, and water rushed in. The little mermaid dived into the deep waters, rising and falling with the waves, searching desperately for her beautiful prince. She found him floating, his dark eyes closed and his arms and legs still. He was nearly drowned. The little mermaid held his head above water and let the waves carry them into shore. As they came towards the land, the little mermaid saw a small sandy bay below a convent. She swam to the beach with the handsome prince and laid him on the fine white sand in the warm sunshine. She swam back out to sea and watched and waited. Soon a girl came out of the convent and ran to the prince. She saw him sit up slowly and smile at the girl, and she was so glad he was alive. But the prince didn't see the little mermaid, and he didn't smile at her. He didn't know that he had rescued him. He didn't know that she had rescued him. And once he was led away to shelter in the convent, this made her very sad. The little mermaid went back off into the sandy bay, but she never saw the prince. In the end, she was so sad that she told her sisters what had happened, and two of them said they knew where the prince's palace was. The 6 sisters swam there together. The palace was made of bright yellow stone and had long flights of steps reaching right down to the sea. Now she knew where he lived. The little mermaid spent many nights in the water nearby. On each visit, the little mermaid swam closer and closer to the shore. One night, she went right up to the marble balcony overlooking the water. The prince was there, looking out to sea in the bright moonlight, but he didn't see her. He thought he was quite alone. She felt glad again that she had saved his life and remembered how he had felt in her arms. The little mermaid wanted to know more and more about human belongings. She went to her grandmother. "Grandmother, if human beings don't drown, can they live forever?" she asked. "They die just like us," replied her grandmother. "We live longer, but when we die, we become white foam on the surface of the water. When human beings die, their soul lives forever and rises up to the stars." "How can I get a soul?" asked the little mermaid. "I'd happily swap hundreds of years of life to be a human being just for one day." Her grandmother sighed. "The only way to get a human soul is if a human falls in love with you. But that won't happen because they think our beautiful fishtails are ugly." That night, there was a ball at the Sea King's castle. The ballroom was made of transparent crystals. The mermaids and mermen danced to their own beautiful singing. The little mermaid had the loveliest voice of all, and the whole court applauded her. For a moment, she felt happy, but then she remembered her prince. "I'll never be happy without a human soul," she thought. "I will go and see the sea witch. I'm afraid of her, but perhaps she can help me." She left her sisters dancing in the castle and swam out beyond the foaming whirlpools. The sea witch lived in the middle of a strange, dark underwater forest, where grasping trees and gloomy flowers held tight to things that had floated down, oars and rudders, metal chests, and human skeletons. The little mermaid was frightened, but she thought of the prince and went on. In the sea witch's lair, water snakes slithered all over the sand. The sea witch allowed toads to eat from her mouth. So "So," she cackled, "you want to swap your own tail for stumpy legs so the prince will fall in love with you. This is very stupid. It will make you unhappy, but very well. Drink the potion. It will make you forget. I will make for you, and you will have legs. You will walk and dance gracefully, but every step you take will feel like you are treading on sharp knives. And," she continued harshly, "you'll never be a mermaid again and will never return to your father's castle. If the prince doesn't fall in love with you, if he marries another, your heart will break and then you will become just foam on the waves." The little mermaid was pale with fear, but said, "I will do it." "My price for the potion," smiled the witch slyly, "is your lovely singing voice. Let me cut out your tongue." "How will the prince fall in love with me if I can't speak or sing?" gasped the little mermaid. "You will have your elegant dancing and your lovely eyes," said the witch with spite. The little mermaid agreed to the price. The witch brewed her a potion and cut out her tongue, taking her voice. The little mermaid swam to the prince's palace on the shore, left the sea, and drank the magic potion, and fell down as if she was dead. When the sun rose, the handsome young prince was standing over her. He looked at her so earnestly, and she became aware that her fish's tail was gone. Instead, she had pretty legs and feet. The prince helped her up. "Who are you?" asked the prince kindly. But the little mermaid couldn't answer him. She couldn't say anything, for she had no voice. He put out his hand and she followed. Through every step felt like treading on knives. He took her into the palace, and soon she was dressed in silk and muslin. When the palace musicians played, the little mermaid danced beautifully. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince, but each step felt sharp and terrible to her. When the little mermaid felt lonely at night, she would go to the edge of the sea and call out to her sisters who bobbed in the water. She missed them very much, but she was happy that she could see the prince every day. Time passed. The little mermaid and the prince went to everywhere together. But though the little mermaid loved the prince more and more, he thought of her only with fondness. "You are so special to me," he said to her, "because you remind me of a young convent girl I met once. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a convent. The young girl found me, and saved my life. She is the only one I could love, but I cannot take her from the convent. He does not know who truly saved his life," thought the little mermaid, and this made her sad. One day, the prince came to her with some news. "We're going on a sea voyage," he exclaimed. "It's time for me to get married, and my parents have arranged a wedding with a king's daughter." The little mermaid couldn't say anything, but she felt sadder than ever. It was a fine ship, and lots of people traveled with them. The prince was nervous. "I don't think I can love this princess," he said to the little mermaid. "I still love that convent girl. And if I can't have her, I would rather marry you, my quiet friend." The little mermaid's heart leapt. Perhaps the prince would fall in love with her after all. The next morning they arrived at a grand harbor. Church bells were ringing and trumpets were sounding. The prince held his breath, and the little mermaid did too. All at once the prince shouted out. He had seen his bride, and it was the girl from the convent. "It's you," he cried, laughing and folding the girl in his arms. "You who saved me." But the little mermaid felt her heart breaking. After the wedding, everyone went back to the ship for a celebration with dancing and singing. The little mermaid left the happy crowd. She leaned on the ship's rail and looked across the water. She knew that the sea witch had said, with the sunrise she would become just foam on the waves. Her sisters came and swam below her. Their long hair had been cut off. "We have given the sea witch our hair," they said, "in exchange for this knife. Kill the prince with this knife, and when his blood drips on your feet, they will turn you back into a tail, and you will be a mermaid again. Hurry, do it before sunrise. Return to us, either you or he must die." The prince was asleep with his new bride. The little mermaid pulled back the crimson curtain around their bed. She bent down and kissed his head. The sky was glowing lighter. The sun would soon appear. She lifted the knife above the prince and trembled. She could hear her sister's words. "Either you or he must die. Either you or he must die." She took a breath and then threw the knife with all her strength over the ship's rails into the water. The first rays of sunlight cut across the waves, and the little mermaid dived into the sea. It seemed she was dissolving into simple white foam, as she had known that she must. But then she felt different. Instead of becoming foam, she rose through the air towards the dawn stars. She blew kisses to the sleeping prince and his bride. She didn't have a human soul, but something of her goodness lived on in the sparkling sunlight above the sea. That's the story. The next story we have is the Christmas tree, which we will come back and read next time.